had me at cello, cello. You had me at cello. You had me at cello. Oh, you had me at cello. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cello Chat. And I'm really delighted to have with me this week Noreen Silver. Noreen, we just met, and I'm very much looking forward to this. I have a number of questions I'm excited to ask you about. But first things first, how are you doing today?
Oh, very well. I'm not back full-time at work yet, so that makes it even better. The sun is shining, it's not too hot, it's not too humid, and I've had a great day, so I'm doing very well. And I
Outstanding.
played a Bach suite today.
Even better.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, for those people watching who aren't familiar with you, can you tell your journey with the cello? How did you get started on it, and where did you get your schooling? How did you get where you are?
Okay, well, I'm from Glasgow, Scotland. That makes me a Glaswegian.
That's sweet.
And I'm the youngest of three children in a family where I never used to think about this, but my mother in particular really valued music and music lessons. So we were all sent to piano lessons at the age of 5, and we were expected to take another instrument two or so years later. My sister, who was 3 years older than me, played the violin and had a ferocious violin teacher, and I was determined not to play the violin. And my mother played the piano, and she made it clear that she wanted to play piano trios and they needed a cellist. And that was it. Yeah. I sometimes wonder, actually, looking back on my childhood, if I chose the cello or if the cello chose me. I'm I'm sure you've heard that a lot, but I could put that differently and say, in becoming a cellist, I know it has shaped my brain, my
Yeah.
thinking, my, what goes through my head when I'm falling asleep at night, and just my way of processing the world is through the world of the cello.
I like that. That's well said.
Thank you.
All right, and then your schooling.
Oh yes, well, I forgot about all
Oh,
that. So I just, I played the cello all through school, high school. A major influence was being accepted into the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, which was a huge deal. We met 3 times a year and played big repertoire. I mean, I played The Rite of Spring when I was 14, and so that was very formative. And then when I was about 15 or 16, my teacher of the time felt I had outgrown her, and she recommended that I go to a more high profile teacher, let's say. And there was a woman in Glasgow by the name of Joan Dixon, who was quite well known and had a quite big career as a cellist. So I studied with her for my remaining years of high school, and then I expected to stay in Glasgow at what's now the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, but then it was the Royal Scottish Academy of Music, but she persuaded me to study with her in London. So I went to the Royal College of Music and did my undergraduate degree there. And well, after that period of time, I was looking, well, I applied for a scholarship that would bring me to the United States, and I was successful in being awarded that scholarship, and I chose to go to New England Conservatory, but there was a gap of a full school year in between. So I thought, what am I going to do with this time? So I went to Switzerland and studied with Pierre Fournier for that time. I also I think you've read a little bit. Jacqueline du Pré was my hero all the way growing up. I went to hear her every time, every opportunity I could find. And while I was in college, she was no longer, it was just about the time she stopped playing, but she was teaching quite a lot and giving classes. And I went to her house and I played in master classes. And years later, when my husband and I went back to live in London, we sought her out and we continued to study with her. Yeah. So yeah, after the Swiss experience with Fournier, I came to the United States to the New England Conservatory, did my master's there, and I met my husband, pianist Phillip Silver, and that's quite a long time ago, but we've been exploring the cello piano repertoire ever since.
All right. And with whom did you study at New England?
Oh, Larry Lesser.
Okay, all right.
For
Yeah.
2 years. He was a fabulous teacher.
All right.
And, it's easy to say people are fabulous teachers, but a lot of it's timing. If you have the right, if the teacher spots the right thing at that moment, it just really works. And it really worked for me in those 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now I know this is a very big question, because you could probably spend hours on it. But are there any general things that you can say kind of about how the differences between Dixon and Fournier and Dupré and Lesser, as far as their main teaching style and what goes around in your head from them every day,
Gosh. Well, I mean, I remember the first time I played for Joan Dixon, and she said, well, your left hand's fine, but your bow hand needs work. And I thought, I would have thought it was the other way around. So, I mean, I was 16 and only starting to think about these things. I thought my bow hand was fine. And then started a lot of consideration for that. And I find myself now looking at students and spotting the same sort of, well, my my bow hand's fine. Well, what's wrong with, how can I get better left hand or a faster left hand or a more agile left hand or something? And I think, just attend to your bow.
Yeah.
So that was Joan Dixon. Lesser was a lot about the sound and just, I think, maybe confidence. He also talked about Piatigorsky a lot, and he would say, you need a little more dirt in your sound. And I think that translates towards confidence and not trying to be just pretty and beautiful all the time. Now, who did Dupré? I mean, that was a separate experience, and I can't even fit it into the regular kind of educational route that I took. There was another teacher I had at college in London, Christopher Bunting.
Yeah. And
he's worthy of a whole.
Yes.
I don't know. I have his notes from way back then. It wasn't always easy to take, but I found myself thinking about the stuff he said, 20 years after he said them. He was a man with an engineering mind, and I think that particular part of his brain appealed to me in an analytical sort of way, and it helped me to kind of analyze the technical side of things.
Yeah.
But I wasn't totally convinced about the end result that he wanted.
Interesting.
I'll leave it there.
All right. How about Fournier?
Fournier was another one who was outside of the regular experience that you would think of as a teacher. I lived in Geneva that year, and I had to phone him, speak in French, and be very pushy about getting a lesson from him. I mean, he was elderly. He didn't want to teach. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the students. He didn't need anything. And I was so embarrassed and uncomfortable and awkward. And I had to do it in French. And he would say things like, well, I'm on tour. And then I would say something like, well, when do you return? And, because he couldn't lie to me, he would tell me when he returned, and I would say, well, can I come that week then? Or 2 days after you get back to Geneva from wherever he was. Right. And so I managed by some kind of working myself up to these phone calls to go to a lesson about once a month. And for the period of time I was in his house, I was in his presence, and it was like I was in his presence, and it was amazing. And for that period of time, which was about maybe 1.5 to 2 hours, I was the sole focus of his attention. But he didn't decide what repertoire I was going to play. He never listened to etudes or scales or anything. So I did Brahms E minor with him. Which I had studied before, and Haydn D major, which I had not studied before, and I can't remember what else, but I chose what repertoire I was going to show up with. Bach, probably.
Yeah.
And I felt, is this the right choice? Am I doing the right thing? But I just soaked it up, and it was more about being in his presence. And I remember, it's also a very long time ago. And I remember some of his advice. He used to say, practice in a room with drapes and carpets and lots of upholstery that soaks up your sound. Don't practice in a flattering acoustic and think you're great. And, so not that we have full control over where we practice, but I do think about that sometimes.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because nothing can be more unsettling than when you're used to hearing this much resonance from your sound, and you're in a situation where you're not going to get that, and you hear more string noise and all these other things.
You turn up at a concert and there's a low ceiling, and there are people about 3 feet away from you, and it's scratchy and
ouch.
Yeah. So.
All right, chamber music. I think chamber music is, I'm a huge fan of solo playing. I'm a huge fan of orchestral playing. I'll go on record for those as well. But there's just a part of me that thinks if the whole world just played chamber music together, you know what I mean? That ability to turn over the reins to somebody else as to exactly when we're going to come in and how we're going to articulate. So you have had a long and distinguished chamber music career. I wonder, do you have any kind of like thoughts of either the value of chamber music, like what I'm talking about, or of recommendations to the viewer about how to get in a effective chamber music mindset?
Okay, I agree with you. Chamber music is the top of the pyramid, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of cooperation and listening and handing over, knowing when to change your role in the music. And I think it's chamber music that's kept me in music my whole life. I certainly wouldn't have pursued a lonely solo career, even if it had been successful. Playing the cello, you know, probably 90% of the cello repertoire is with other people, either with piano or with other people. You know, the solo unaccompanied repertoire is, oh, well, carries a huge responsibility. In fact, a few years ago, I decided to make myself play all the Bach suites, not at once, but 2 a year in our universities on a series for faculty.
Right.
And I was so, well, I learned a lot from that. What I learned was that being alone on stage is a different kettle of fish from being on stage with a pianist. And I talked to another cellist in Maine about it, and he said, "Oh, I love it. I can do what I like, when I like, and I'm all by myself, and I can just be anything." And I thought, yeah, but I feel 150% responsible for every sound that happens. So, you know, it's just from a different angle. I'm very glad I played those Bach suites, because I think just having programmed them and forced myself to play them, you know what it means to be responsible for every note. And I used to say to my students, you're responsible for every sound you make. And don't come crying to me when the newspaper critic says that you were scratchy and out of tune. Don't be scratchy and out of tune, or just say, oh, okay, I'll get better next time.
Yeah.
I think I'm rambling and I'm going off at a tangent. But so back to chamber music. I mean, I remember the first piece of real chamber music I played, and it was Beethoven Opus 11. My brother was playing the clarinet, my mother was playing the piano, and it was the first real chamber piece, and it was magnificent.
Yeah.
I think I was 11 years old. I'm not sure, about that, something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're back to the soul. What feeds the soul? There's a magic to, well, it's like, what's that expression? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I don't actually want to ever define that magic. I want to keep it as magic and let it flow through me and be the thing that, you know, the elixir of life, if you like. Yeah.
That's nice.
So one of the things you asked, what was it about? Encouraging students to play chamber music or inspiring?
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think it can be, I don't know, it can take a different adjustment for different types of people, of course. For some people, there's this like a letting go, you know, of control, and sometimes you have a particular interpretation of the piece, and can you find a way to understand what this other person is hearing in the passage and become happy with that too, you know, those sorts of things. And then I also think just even things like the precision of articulation and rhythm that it requires to not just be pretty much with the other person, but to be exactly with them, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the nature of the instrument. You know, the nature of the piano is press the finger down and the note sounds according to the weight of the, you know, the whole thing with the piano technique. And the nature of a bowed string instrument is slightly different. And a wind instrument or a singer, and bringing all these different instruments together, I find I've learned so much from playing with singers and playing with keyboardists and playing with wind players, just how this whole thing comes together. Yeah, and the other thing is listening and being able to track different voices at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I for example, when there's a certain habit among students, I see it often around, they walk around with music all the time, and I think, well, what are you doing? Are you doing your homework with music there? Are you having a conversation with music there? Where does it all fit in? So giving it your undivided attention, tracking the different voices, and changing roles. The best example I can give of changing roles is Beethoven's Opus 18, number 4. So if you're you're the cellist, you start off with yup, up, 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 with a whole lot of repeated C's, and then suddenly you get da 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 ti, da, da, and it's terrifying. And, you've been chugging along playing these easy notes, and then suddenly you have this, and being able to change that role is more difficult than it sounds, and it's magnificent.
It's magnificent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. All right. So can we segue also to the your duo, the
Silver duo.
Yes, with your husband. You don't just play the standard repertoire, but a mix of well-known pieces and less well-known pieces. And I'm sure that's by design. So I'm just wondering a bit of why you do that. I mean, I like it, but what it is that you're wanting to achieve, and then how you go about finding these less well-known gems, these hidden gems.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to give Philip most of the credit for finding the music. When we met through Beethoven, by the way. We met when I went to New England Conservatory, and I was learning Opus 5, number 1, and I asked him if he knew it and could play it with me, and he had never played it. And of course, he assured me that he knew it, and he, sort of went and learned it instantly. And anyway, so I was more of a traditional, I can't play the non-standard repertoire until I know the standard repertoire kind of person. And he was all about how do you get from Haydn to Mozart to Beethoven to Chopin, and he showed me all the route, let's say, through Hummel and a lot of less well-known people, and that Würfel sonata popped up along the way. Oh yeah, back in those days, we used to go to libraries, and whenever we traveled, we did two things. We went to a library, found the music section, and pulled out every single piece they had for cello and piano and looked at it, and we thought, this looks interesting, let's go home and play it. We went to the music stores. We went, you can't do this now. You have to know what you want. You can't sort of rummage through the internet of cello piano repertoire, but we would go to the libraries and once a week and just pull out books and find stuff.
Okay.
And he's got an interesting background as well, because he's a concert pianist, and he also teaches music history, and he has always wondered about, well, how did that piece get from there to, how do you get from Mozart to Chopin, for example? Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So he's the impetus behind the less standard repertoire, and he is the primary researcher. I'm just the tag along. Or as I like to say, I'm just the pretty face, that happens to play the cello.
That's awesome. All right, Noreen, I like to ask everybody that I have on a question about motivating students. It's just kind of a running theme. There's some students, kind of never need a nudge, but others know that they're in some sort of a rut. So I'm just wondering, do you have some things that you do to help your students when they need that extra motivation that you'd share with our viewers?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the student has to discover for themselves the soul, the magic. So if they're not finding that, there's not a quick fix. I do try through chamber music to match people well and choose repertoire carefully. I also do a sort of meditative thing where you kind of become one with the cello and just listen to the sound and, sit there and hold your cello and play a G major scale or a C major scale or just an open G string and feel it all the way along the bow. And back to the bow, I do feel that the left hand is more obvious about what it needs to be. I mean, if it's not in tune, it's not in tune, and that's not acceptable. And we all understand that. And sometimes maybe I take that too much for granted, that you can hear that and that you're going to fix it. But are you listening to the sound? Can you hear what happens? And you have to be responsible for the sound from end to end of the bow. And can you create different things? So it's a variety of approaches. Listening to, well, I've also got a thing that I call the ideal sound, which is you have to have the ideal sound in your head to be able to lift the music off the page. So it's not just about looking at a blank piece of paper, a page of music and translating music notes into bow strokes and left hand. It's about lifting it off the page in the end. And the composer is limited to those symbols, dynamic markings, tempo markings, expression markings. But the more your palette of colors has the ability to make something of those, then the more you'll be able to free yourself from, and by free, I don't mean, unrhythmical and just random. Right. I mean, free to think, oh, there's a possibility there. There's a new possibility. Oh, I can do that. So it's not, there's no one quick answer to that question, like all your questions, or maybe it's me that I tend to
no, it's true.
Rambling answers. But yeah, so the ideal sound is one thing, just listening to sound, just learning how you can change sound and how you can use sound and listening to how sound enters into your being. And understanding everything, like the history of the piece and where the composer, what the experiences of the composer are like, that factors into it as well.
Awesome. All right. In the remainder of 2024, for example, performances coming up, other projects, what's coming down the pike?
Well, we have a big recital coming up in the University of Maine on the 10th of October. We're going to do the Beethoven Opus 5 number 1 that brought us together in the first place.
Nice.
We're going to end with the Shostakovich Sonata, which is a piece we've played a lot. And in between, we're playing the second sonata by Martinu. And I didn't mention that we lived in Israel for 5 years. So we're playing a piece by an Israeli composer called Yizkor, which means in memoriam. And this program is very close to October 7th. October 10th, and it's a piece that's actually originally for viola and orchestra, and we've played it before cello and piano, so we'll be playing that as well. That's yeah, and parts of that program we will play locally in November and December, and then we have another project with a cellist from Seattle, a young woman called Sarah Rommel. I don't know if you know her.
Oh.
She has given a master class at University of Maine 2 years ago, and I was able to get a grant for her to come back and give a recital. So she has a whole program that will include the Poulenc Sonata, and we're doing the Menotti Suite for 2 cellos and piano.
Fun.
And some other stuff, Boccherini Sonata for 2 cellos, and you'll do some solo stuff. So that's the immediate.
Excellent, tremendous. Well, I hope you have a lot of fun with all of those, and with playing daily Bach and finding the soul of every piece of music again and again.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the search.
Yes. Noreen, you're a bit of a poet. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah. You mentioned CDs. I could plug our 2 CDs.
Yes, do.
Because they really relate to a very important area of our less well-known performances, which again comes back to my husband's research, which was to unearth music that was written by composers who were affected by Nazi racial policies in Europe in the 1930s. And that includes Jewish composers who were murdered in the camps, and composers who were forced into exile, and other composers whose lives were just destroyed. So we have 2 CDs out. One is by an Italian composer by the name of Leone Sinigalia. There's a great cello piano sonata, and there's a violin sonata on that CD as well. And the other is by a German composer who actually died before the 30s, but his life was affected. His name is Bernhard Seklas, and there's he was Hindemith's teacher. It's a very quirky and difficult cello piano sonata and a piano trio, and yeah, those are our 2 CDs. But Philip has uncovered a lot of music. He has taught university courses on the subject, which goes beyond cello and piano music. But yeah, and you get into the wide-ranging effect of the devastation of this period of history.
Oh, wow. Takes powerful music and makes it even more powerful.
It does, yes. And I mean, one of the points that he makes now is that the history of music composition was altered by destroying that generation.
Wow.
There's another sonata that we play is by a James Simon, who had a tragic end in Auschwitz. And there's a very beautiful solo cello piece that I play by him called Arioso. And there's another cello piano piece that we play.
Wow. I'll have to check those out.
Yeah. The Arioso, I believe, is on IMSLP. I recorded it for Bangor Symphony, did a little, they called it, what did they call it? It was pandemic stuff, you know, this. Anyway, I recorded it for them. And after that, somebody put it up on IMSLP.
All right. Excellent. Yeah, it's on YouTube, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know, maybe.
Okay, I think I saw that one. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your thoughts, and this whole series. The intent is not only to get to know the enormous world of cello performers out there, cello teachers, but to be then inspired all weekend and all the following weekend. Who knows how much longer? But at least if they get inspired for a full week, it will take them until this time next week for the next Cello Chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful project, and you're to be commended for putting your energy into it.
Well,
I mean, it can be a lonely business sometimes.
But it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fascinating people whose ways of thinking have been altered by the wonderful cello.
Yes, there you go.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Noreen. And
thank you.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
You had me at cello.